My son gave me 30 days to leave my own house. He didn't say it to my face. He typed it, printed it, and left it on the kitchen table under the salt shaker my wife bought in 1986, like a bill that was past due. 30 days. Signed, Daniel, my boy. And I'll tell you what I did, friend, standing alone in that kitchen holding my own eviction notice. I laughed, because my son had planned everything. The retirement home, the deposit, the moving boxes, everything except one piece of paper locked in a safe deposit box downtown that he had never once thought to check. The deed to that house, and the only name on that deed is mine. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. It hurt worse than anything since I lost my Ellen. But what I did with those 30 days and what happened at my dinner table on day 29, I have never told anyone start to finish. Tonight I will. So pour yourself a coffee, settle in, and let me tell it the way it happened. My name is Frank. I'm 68 years old. I taught that boy to ride a bike on the driveway I poured with my own 2 hands. And this is a story about the difference between a house and a name on a door. I built that house in 1983. And when I say built, I don't mean I signed papers while other men worked. I was a machinist for 31 years at Hallworth Tool and Die, and back then a working man could still put up a house if he was willing to bleed for it. Ellen and I bought the lot at the end of Maple Crest Road when it was nothing but a field with one stubborn oak tree in the corner. Weekends, holidays, summer evenings after 10-hour shifts, I framed that house with my brother Gene and 2 men from the shop. Ellen carried lumber when she was 7 months pregnant with Daniel, until I hollered at her to sit down, and she hollered right back that it was her house too, and she'd carry what she pleased. That was Ellen, 5'2" of pure iron. We raised Daniel in that house, measured his height in pencil marks on the pantry door frame every birthday from age 2 to 17. I know every pipe behind those walls because I sweated every joint. I know which stair creaks, the third one because I ran out of the good boards and used a warped one, and Ellen said leave it, that way we'll always hear Danny sneaking in late. She was right. We always did. Ellen passed 3 years ago this October. Cancer. 14 months from the diagnosis to the morning she squeezed my hand in that hospital bed and told me 2 things. The second thing I'll tell you later because it matters more than anything else in this story, and you'll understand why when we get there. But the first thing she said was, take care of our boy. He's softer than he looks. Softer than he looks. Lord, Ellen, if you only knew. The house went quiet after her. You don't know what quiet is until you've lived inside it. 40 years of her radio in the kitchen, her sewing machine humming in the back room, her voice calling me in from the garage for supper, and then nothing. Just a refrigerator buzzing and an old man learning to cook for one. So when Daniel called that spring, 6 months after the funeral, and said, Dad, we've been thinking, Megan and I, we're worried about you rattling around in that big place alone. What if we came and stayed with you a while? I didn't hesitate. God help me, I didn't hesitate for 1 second. I thought, my son is coming home. My grandson Tommy is going to grow up with pencil marks on that same pantry door. The house is going to be loud again. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. If I'd known then what I know now, would I have said no? People ask that kind of question like it's simple. It isn't. Because for the first few weeks it was everything I'd hoped. Tommy's sneakers thundering down the hall, the smell of dinner that I didn't cook, noise, life. My boy under my roof again. That first month, I'll tell you, was the closest thing to happiness I'd had since the funeral. Daniel and I rewired the light over the workbench together one Saturday, him holding the flashlight the way he did at 9 years old, and for an hour it was 1998 in that garage and nobody had ever died. Megan baked. Tommy discovered the creaky third stair and made it his personal instrument, jumped on it every morning like a one-note piano, and I'd lie in bed listening to it and grinning at the ceiling. The house had a pulse again. Ellen's radio station even came back on in the kitchen, though it was Megan's phone playing it through a little speaker, and the first time I heard it, I had to go stand in the yard a minute. I thought we were becoming a family in the old way, 3 generations under one roof, the way it was when I was a boy. I just didn't understand, yet that Daniel and Megan hadn't moved into my house to live with me. They'd moved in to wait me out. The first thing to go was my chair. You'll think that's a small thing. It wasn't. It was a brown leather recliner that sat in the same spot by the front window for 22 years, angled just right so Ellen and I could watch the street and the porch light and the evening come down over Maple Crest. I read 40 years of newspapers in that chair. I held my dying wife's hand from that chair, hers on the armrest of the one beside it. I came home from the hardware store one Tuesday and it was gone. In its place was a gray sectional the size of a barge, and Megan was standing there with a measuring tape and a smile, saying, "Doesn't it open up the room, Frank? We put your old chair in the garage for now. For now." I want you to remember that phrase, because I heard it 100 times over the next 2 years, and it never once meant what it said. Ellen's sewing room became a home office. For now. My workshop in the garage, 30 years of tools organized so well I could find a 1/4-inch socket blindfolded, got pushed into one corner behind Megan's exercise equipment. For now. The pencil marks on the pantry door, Daniel's whole childhood in graphite, painted over one weekend while I was at Jean's helping him fix a water heater. I stood in front of that door for a long time when I got home. Megan said the old marks looked scuffed, and anyway, they were repainting the kitchen in something called greige. I didn't fight any of it. You might think less of me for that, and some days I thought less of myself. But you have to understand what I was afraid of. I was afraid that if I made noise, they'd leave, and I'd be alone again with the refrigerator buzzing. And there was Tommy, 6 years old, gap-toothed, following me around the garage, handing me the wrong wrenches with the proudest look on his face. Every man has a price for his silence. Mine was that boy. So I swallowed it, all of it. I swallowed it when Megan started introducing me at her dinner parties as, "This is Daniel's father, he stays with us. He stays with us." In the house where I'd replaced every shingle twice. I swallowed it when the grocery list started appearing on the counter with my name at the top, and the babysitting schedule filled itself in around Megan's spin classes and brunches without anyone asking whether Thursday worked for me. Old Frank's got nowhere to be. Old Frank is grateful for the company. And the sick thing is, they weren't wrong. I was grateful. That's the part that still burns. They knew I was grateful, and they used it the way you use a crowbar. I swallowed it when Daniel sat me down, very serious, man of the house voice, and suggested I start contributing to household expenses. Utilities, groceries, his words were, "It's only fair, Dad, costs are up." I sat there in a kitchen I had wired myself, at a table Ellen refinished with her own hands, and my son asked me for rent money. And I paid it. Every month, first of the month, I wrote a check like a boarder. Gene found out about that a year later and didn't speak to me for a week. He was so mad. He said, "Frankie, that's your house." And I told him what I'd been telling myself. "It's just money. It keeps the peace." He looked at me the way you look at a man standing in the rain insisting he isn't wet. Then came the business with my truck. In the fall, Megan started making remarks, light as feathers, every one of them. Did I really think I should be driving at night at my age? Had I heard about the man in the next county, her exact words about my age, Frank, who hit a mailbox? One evening my keys weren't on the hook by the door where they've hung for 40 years. They turned up 2 days later in a kitchen drawer under the takeout menus, and Megan said, "Oh, I must have tidied them away," and smiled, and I stood there holding my own keys feeling like I'd stolen them. After that I started keeping them in my pocket all day, every day. And if you've never felt the need to carry your own keys inside your own house, I'm glad for you, and I hope you never learn what it does to a man's spine. But the garden was the one that nearly broke me. Ellen's roses ran the whole south side of the lot, 40 years of them. She had varieties out there she'd traded cuttings for by mail with women in 3 different states, roses with names like Old Songs, Abraham Darby, Gertrude Jekyll. After she passed, tending them was the only conversation the two of us had left. I'd deadhead the blooms and tell her about my week. Foolish old man talking to flowers, sure. It was the best hour of my day. I came home from a doctor's appointment in April, and there was a landscaping crew loading the last of the rose bushes into a dump trailer. Sod going down where the beds had been. Megan on the porch with a clipboard, waving at me like it was Christmas morning. "We're doing low maintenance, Frank," she called out. "Clean lines. It'll be so much easier for everybody." Easier for everybody. I stood in my driveway, and I watched 40 years of my wife drive away in a trailer, and I did not say one single word. Because on the porch next to Megan was Tommy, holding a juice box, waving at me with his whole arm the way little kids do. That night was the first time I took the key to the safe deposit box out of my sock drawer and just held it in my hand for a while. Not because I had a plan yet. Just to remind myself it was there. Now here is where I have to stop and explain something, because without it, nothing that happened later will make sense to you. I need to tell you about a piece of paper my son believed existed. A piece of paper he had believed in for so long and so completely that he built his whole future on it. 2 years after Ellen died, Daniel came to me with a folder. Very official looking, tabs and sticky arrows pointing where to sign. He'd been talking to a friend who did estate planning, he said, and Dad, we really should get the house squared away. Transfer the title now, avoid probate later, protect the asset. He had all the vocabulary. Asset protection. Step-up basis. Medicaid look back. Words that don't sound like anything until you're 66, and your son is sliding them across the table at you like a car salesman working the numbers. And I'll tell you the truth. I almost signed. The pen was in my hand, because I trusted him and because when you're a certain kind of tired, signing feels easier than asking questions. What stopped me was the second thing Ellen said in that hospital bed. I told you there were 2 things. Take care of our boy was the first. The second thing she said, holding my hand hard enough to leave marks, was this. Frank, whatever happens, the house stays in your name while you're breathing. Do you hear me? Yours. Don't you ever sign it away, not to anyone, not for any reason someone dresses up as being sensible. A man with a deed gets spoken to. A man without one gets spoken about. I didn't fully understand her then. I thought it was the medicine talking. It took me 2 more years to learn that my wife wasn't foggy at the end. She was seeing clearer than any of us. She had watched her own mother sign a farmhouse over to her brother. My Ellen watched it, and she watched her mother spend her last years being moved from spare room to spare room like an old sofa nobody had space for. Ellen knew exactly what she was saying to me. So when Daniel slid that folder across the table, I heard her voice, plain as if she were standing behind me. And I set the pen down and I said, "Let me have my lawyer look it over first, son. Just to be careful." You'd have thought I'd spit on him. His jaw got tight and he said, "Harold Brenner is 100 years old, Dad. This is standard stuff." And I said, "Then it'll survive a reading." And I put the folder in the drawer of my nightstand and there it sat. Here's the part I didn't know. The part I only pieced together later, from things Megan said at that dinner table on day 29, when everything came apart. Daniel told Megan I signed it. I don't know if he lied to her outright, or if he told himself a softer version. Dad basically agreed, it's as good as done. The paperwork's a formality. I've turned it over 1,000 nights and I still can't decide which is worse. But from that day forward, my son and his wife lived in that house believing it already belonged to them. Every renovation, every repainted wall, every rose bush in that dump trailer, they weren't redecorating my house. In their minds, they were improving their own property. And the old man in the back bedroom, writing his little rent checks, he wasn't the owner. He was the holdover tenant. Once you understand that, everything they did stops being confusing and starts being obvious. The way Megan's brother Rick, who had just gotten his real estate license, started coming around on Sundays, walking through rooms with his phone out, taking pictures of the crown molding I'd cut and coped by hand. "Comps in this neighborhood are unbelievable right now," he'd say loud to no one in particular. The way brochures started appearing on the kitchen counter, glossy ones, with silver-haired couples laughing over card games. Sunny Meadows, a community for active senior living. The way Megan left one on my breakfast plate, actually on my plate, with a sticky note that said, "No pressure, just a thought." They weren't hiding it because they didn't think they had to hide it. You don't sneak around the tenant. You manage him. Around Thanksgiving, I overheard the two of them in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping, whatever that word even means, inside your own walls. I was coming down the hall in my socks and they didn't hear me. Megan's voice, low and hard, a voice she never used when I was in the room. "It was never supposed to be this long, Daniel. Rick says spring is the peak. Your dad will be fine, he'll adjust, they always adjust. And my son said, I know, I'll handle him. I'll handle him." I went back to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at Ellen's picture on the nightstand for a long time. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because this story doesn't work if I lie to you. I didn't feel rage. Rage came later and it didn't stay long. What I felt that night was the bottom dropping out. That specific cold that comes when you finally stop explaining away the evidence. My son was not going to take care of me the way I had taken care of him. I was a problem being scheduled for removal. And they say the body knows before the mind does, because my hands were steady as stone when I reached into the sock drawer, took out that little key, and set it on the nightstand next to Ellen. I looked at her picture and I said, out loud in the dark, "All right, sweetheart. All right, your way now." I should tell you about the coffee shop, because that was the morning I first saw myself from the outside. Jean and I have breakfast every other Thursday at the Lantern, same booth, going back to when we both had dark hair. That winter Nadine, who's poured our coffee for 20 years, set my cup down and said, "Gentle as anything, so frank, big changes, huh? Your daughter-in-law was in on Tuesday with her sister, telling everybody you're headed for Sunny Meadows in the spring. Said you'd finally agreed to let the house go." And Jean's cup stopped halfway to his mouth, and I sat there learning that strangers in a coffee shop knew more about my future than I did. That's a particular kind of cold friend. Being the last man in town to hear the plan for your own life. Jean drove me home, and neither of us said much, but at the curb he looked at my house a long moment and said, "Frankie, whatever you've got in that safe deposit box of yours, don't you lose track of it." The letter came on a Tuesday in March. I want you to picture how I found it because I've thought a lot about the staging of it. They didn't hand it to me. Nobody sat me down. It was on the kitchen table when I came in from the garage, one single sheet, laser printed, tucked under Ellen's salt shaker like a receipt. "Dear Dad, we love you very much, which is why this letter is so difficult to write. After a great deal of thought, Megan and I feel that the current living situation is no longer working for our family's needs. We believe a transition to a community better suited to your stage of life is best for everyone. We have taken the liberty of reserving a unit at Sunny Meadows. The deposit is taken care of. We will need you to make arrangements to relocate within 30 days, as we have plans for the house that will require the space." Plans for the house that will require the space. And then the last line, "And if I live to 100, I will never forget it. We hope you can see this is coming from a place of love." Signed, not written by hand, printed Daniel and Megan. 30 days. In the house where I'd sistered every joist. signed by a boy whose height lived under 2 coats of grayish paint on the pantry door. I stood in that kitchen holding the letter, and here is where I told you at the beginning that I laughed. Now you know enough to understand the laugh. Because Daniel could only have written that letter if he believed, all the way to the bottom, that the house was already his. You don't give the owner 30 days. You give the tenant 30 days. My son had just told me, in writing on paper, exactly what he believed the paperwork said. And I knew something he didn't. That folder he'd given me 2 years ago was still in my nightstand drawer, unsigned, every page of it, and the deed to the house at 14 Maple Crest Road, recorded at the county in 1984, said then what it says now. Franklin J. Merrill and Ellen R. Merrill, and when she passed, by the way that kind of deed works, it all came to me. One name, mine. Not a trust, not a transfer, not a life estate, none of the vocabulary. Just an old machinist's name on a piece of paper that no amount of grayish paint could cover. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, because Gene said it out loud the next morning when I showed him the letter in his kitchen. He read it twice, went red from the collar up, and said, "Frankie, you walk back in there tonight. You throw the pair of them out on the lawn, and you change the locks while they're standing on it." And believe me, there is a version of this story where I did exactly that. It would have felt wonderful, for about a day. But I had 30 days, and a man who has spent his life as a machinist knows what you can do with time and patience. You don't force a fit. You measure. You measure twice, 10 times, and you let the piece tell you where it wants to give. So I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I made an appointment, put on the good jacket, the one Ellen bought me for Daniel's wedding, and I went downtown to see Harold Brenner. Harold has been my lawyer and my friend since we coached Little League together in 1979. He's 81 now, still sharp as a chisel, still comes to the office 3 days a week mostly to get away from his daughter's cooking, his words. I put the letter on his desk and I put the key to the safe deposit box next to it, and I told him everything. The rent checks, the roses, Rick and his comps. Sunny Meadows. I'll handle him. All of it, front to back, and Harold didn't interrupt once, just listened with his fingers laced together the way he does. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and said the sentence I'd driven downtown to hear. "Frank," he said, "they have no idea, do they?" "No," I said, "I don't believe they do." And then Harold Brenner, 81 years old, officer of the court, pillar of the First Methodist congregation, smiled at me in a way I hadn't seen since our boys took the district championship in 1981, and he pulled a fresh legal pad toward himself, clicked his pen, and said, "Well then, let's take our time and do this properly." Here is what Harold and I did with the next 4 weeks, while the moving boxes Megan had thoughtfully ordered for me sat flat and unfolded in the garage, leaning against my old brown recliner. First, Harold pulled the deed from the county records, certified copies, 3 of them, because Harold believes in threes. Then he pulled the property tax rolls, 41 years of them, every payment out of my account. Then the insurance, mine. The original construction permits from 1983, my name, my signatures, my thumbprint in the concrete of the back step if it came to that. By the time Harold was done assembling that folder, the question of whose house it was had exactly one answer: notarized, certified, and indexed with little tabs. Harold does love his tabs. Second, and this is the part that took discipline, I changed nothing at home, not one thing in my behavior. I wrote the April rent check, first of the month, same as always. Megan actually patted my shoulder when she took it. I babysat Tommy on the Thursdays. I nodded along when Rick walked through my bedroom, with a laser measure, talking about staging and how buyers love a 4th bedroom. We'll call it a den. I said things like, "Well, you know best, and I suppose it is a lot of house for me." I watched relief spread across my son's face every time I said it. Grief teaches an old man how to hold his face still. It's a terrible schooling, but it does not wear off. And in the middle of that second week, I went to the bank myself, alone, and had the girl walk me back to the little room with the table, and I opened the box for the first time since Ellen died. The deed was there, of course, in its envelope, where it had waited out the whole occupation like a soldier nobody relieved. But that's not what kept me in that room past my parking meter. Ellen's wedding band was in there, in a velvet box worn shiny at the corners. And under it, a photograph I'd forgotten we'd put away, the two of us in 1983, standing in front of the framed-out skeleton of the house, her hand flat on a stud like she was blessing it, both of us young and sunburned and sure of everything. On the back in her hand it said, "The day the walls went up." I sat in that little room at the bank and held the reason for all of it, and I'll admit something to you, friend. That was the one time in the whole 30 days I cried. Not at the letter, not at the roses, at a photograph of two kids who had no idea. Then I put everything back but the deed, signed the ledger, and walked out into the sunshine steadier than I'd walked in years. I'm not going to pretend that month was easy. Twice I nearly broke. Once when I found Tommy sitting on the garage floor next to my recliner, dusting it off with his sleeve, and he looked up and said, "Grandpa, is it true you're moving to the Old People Hotel? Am I still going to see you?" I had to walk to the workbench and pretend to look for a screwdriver for a good long minute before I trusted my voice. And once on Ellen's birthday, when I caught Megan measuring the south lawn, where the roses used to be, for what I learned later was going to be a pergola. Whatever a pergola is. But I held, because Harold had explained something to me across that legal pad, and the more I turned it over, the more I understood that this was never going to be about revenge. Revenge is loud and it's fast, and it leaves you standing in the wreckage feeling exactly as empty as before. What I wanted was the thing Ellen had named in that hospital bed without me understanding her. A man with a deed gets spoken to. A man without one gets spoken about. For 2 years I had been spoken about, handled, managed, scheduled. All I intended to do on day 29 was arrange for one conversation, one in which I got spoken to. What happened after that would be up to them. There was one more thing Harold turned up, though, and I have to tell you about it, because it changed the temperature of everything. In the third week, doing his diligence, Harold discovered that a listing agreement had already been drafted. Rick had prepared the paperwork to put my house on the market, listing date set for the 15th of May, 12 days after my 30 days ran out. Photographs already taken, that's what the Sunday walkthroughs had been. The listing described it, and I'm quoting, as a lovingly updated mid-century home, owner relocated. Owner relocated. They had sold my chair to make room for a sectional, and now the listing had sold me to make room for a closing. And underneath the anger which came then, hot and stayed about a week, there was a colder thing. They had a signed reservation at Sunny Meadows with a move-in date, they had a listing date, they had a pergola quote. The only thing in the whole plan they had never checked, not once in 2 years, was the one thing the entire plan stood on. Nobody had ever pulled the deed. Daniel believed a folder in a nightstand had signed itself. Megan believed whatever Daniel had told her. Rick, a licensed real estate agent, so help me, took his brother-in-law's word for the title. 3 adults, 1 plan, 0 minutes at the county recorder's office, which is open Monday through Friday and charges $2 a page. Harold said, "In 46 years of practice, Frank, you'd be amazed. Families are the only crime scene where nobody checks the locks." So we set our piece in place. Harold drafted 2 documents, and I'll tell you what they were in a moment. I invited Daniel and Megan to a family dinner for day 29, told them I wanted to talk about the transition, watched Megan's shoulders drop with relief. He's adjusting. They always adjust. I cooked Ellen's pot roast myself, from her card, in her writing, out of the recipe box they'd never thought to paint over. I set 4 places at the table my wife refinished. I want to tell you about cooking that pot roast, because I've come to believe it was the most important part of the plan, and it was the one part Harold didn't draft. Ellen's card is in her recipe box, third divider, stained at the corner, and her writing slants uphill because she was an optimist even in cursive. Brown it hard, don't crowd the pan. She has that underlined twice. It took me the better part of the afternoon, and the whole time, the house filled up with a smell it hadn't worn in 3 years, and I watched that smell work on my family like weather. Tommy drifted into the kitchen twice asking when. Even Megan stood in the doorway a moment longer than she needed to. Smells go around the brain's defenses, straight to the back rooms where the real people live. I wasn't just cooking supper. I was calling a house to remember itself one last time before I said what I had to say in it. And at 6 o'clock on the evening of day 29, with the porch light on and the pot roast resting, I sat down at the head of my table, and I waited for my family to come tell me about my future. They came to dinner happy. I want that on the record because it matters to what happened. They came down those stairs, the third one creaking like 2 people arriving at the end of a long project. Megan had a folder of her own, Sunny Meadows welcome packet, glossy, with a lanyard in it. A lanyard. Daniel poured himself a glass of the good red and one for me, and he was warm, genuinely warm, warmer than he'd been in months, and that told me everything about how sure they were. It's easy to be kind to a problem that's already solved. We ate first. I made sure of that. You don't rush the last supper in the house you built. Tommy told a long story about a lizard at school, and I listened to every word of it, and I looked around my kitchen slowly, at the door frame under the paint, at the window over the sink where Ellen used to stand, and I said my goodbyes to none of it, because I wasn't the one leaving. With the plates cleared, Megan squared her folder and began the presentation. And it was a presentation, she had rehearsed it. The unit at Sunny Meadows faces the courtyard, Frank. There's a shuttle to the pharmacy on Tuesdays. Movement classes. She slid the lanyard across the table to me. Daniel picked it up when I didn't and set it gently in front of my plate and said, "Dad, we know this is hard, but we truly think it's what's best." And then, so help me, he said, "It's what Mom would have wanted." I let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. I owed it that. It was the bravest thing anybody had said in that house in 2 years, even if it was brave the way a man on thin ice is brave, because he doesn't know what's under him. Then I said, "That's interesting, son, because your mother did leave instructions about this house. Would you like to hear them?" Something moved in Daniel's face, down at the bottom under the confidence, the first hairline crack. I took Harold's folder off the chair beside me, Ellen's chair, where I'd set it before they came down, and I laid 3 documents on the table, one at a time, the way you deal cards to people who have been playing your money without asking. The first was the deed, certified copy, county seal, recorded April of 1984. I turned it to face them and I put one finger on the names. Franklin J. Merrill, Ellen R. Merrill. And I said quietly, because quiet was all it needed, "This deed has never been amended, transferred, or conveyed. When your mother died, her interest passed to me. This house has one owner, Daniel. He's sitting at the head of this table, drinking your wine, which is his wine, in point of fact, because you've been buying it with the money he pays you to live in his own home." Nobody breathed. The second document was the unsigned transfer folder from my nightstand, and this one I slid directly to Megan because she was the one who needed it. Every sticky arrow still in place, every signature line still empty. I said, "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding in this family about this paperwork. I never signed it. I was asked to 2 years ago. I declined, and I told Daniel I was having Harold review it. It has been in a drawer ever since." And then I watched my son's marriage change shape in real time. Megan looked at the empty signature lines, and then she looked at Daniel, and her voice came out low and flat, a voice for later, a voice that promised a much longer conversation in another room. You told me this was done. Daniel, you told me 2 years ago it was handled. The listing, Rick, the deposit, you let me, and there she stopped, because there are sentences you don't finish in front of a witness. Daniel had gone the color of the grayish. He was staring at the folder like it was a door he'd walked past every day for 2 years, never once trying the handle. Dad, he started. Dad, we can, this is, nobody meant. And I held up my hand, and my hand was steady, and my boy went silent in my house. The third document, I said, is from Harold Brenner's office. And son, I want you to notice something about it before you read it. I had it printed and I signed it by hand, and I am giving it to you across a table, face to face, with a meal in you that I cooked, which is a courtesy. It is the same courtesy I did not receive. It was a letter. It informed Daniel and Megan that their occupancy of 14 Maple Crest Road was ending, and that they had 30 days to make other arrangements. It noted that the drafted listing agreement was void, the owner having authorized no such thing. And it noted, Harold insisted on this line, and I have come to treasure it, that the owner wished them well in finding a community better suited to their stage of life. 30 days, I said, same as you gave me. I'm told it comes from a place of love. I'd like to tell you the table erupted because part of you probably wants the shouting, but that isn't what happened. What happened was quieter and, I think, worse for them. Megan gathered up her welcome packet with shaking hands very carefully, like it was suddenly evidence, and walked upstairs without one word. Daniel sat across from me for a long time. The refrigerator buzzed. The porch light hummed against the window, the way it has for 40 years. And my son looked at his hands and said, "So what happens now, Dad?" And I said, "Now you're asking, that's new, that's a start." We sat there a while longer, the two of us, and I'm glad no one was there to see it, because there was nothing dramatic to watch. Just a father and a son at a cleared table, with a folder between them, relearning what order the family came in. At some point Tommy called down from upstairs that he couldn't find his pajama shirt, the way kids do, aiming it at whoever would answer. And both of us stood up at the same time, out of 40 years of habit each, and then both of us stopped. And I said, "Go on, son. He's yours. You go." And Daniel looked at me for a second with something in his face I hadn't seen since he was small, and he went up the stairs, and I heard the third one creak under him, and I sat back down at my table in my house and finished my wine. His wine. Mine, in point of fact. I believe I've made that point. It still tasted good. I want to be careful in this last part, because this is the piece of the story people get wrong when they tell stories like mine. They think the deed was the victory. It wasn't. The deed was only the floor, the thing that meant I couldn't be moved like furniture. The victory, if that's even the word, was smaller and slower, and it's still going on. They left within the 30 days to a rental across town, paid for, I later learned, partly by returning the Sunny Meadows deposit. Rick lost the listing, and I'm told some standing at Sunday dinners. For a while there was silence. Real silence, the kind I knew well. I won't pretend to you that it didn't hurt. Sitting alone in a house full of grayish walls I now had every right to repaint, and no particular strength to. A man can be entirely in the right and still lie awake at 2 in the morning listening for a creak on the third stair. I'll tell you 2 small things from that quiet stretch because they matter. The first is that in June, a box arrived on my porch with no note. Inside, wrapped in a dish towel, was Ellen's recipe box, which I hadn't even realized had left the house, and her seam ripper and a spool of her thread. Megan never said a word about it, and neither did I, but I know an apology when it's packed that carefully. The second is that Harold Brenner called me at the end of that month, not as a lawyer, just as a man, and asked was I eating, and I said yes, and he said good, then come eat with Marjorie and me on Fridays anyway. I went every Friday for a year. You find out at 68. That pride is a food with no nourishment in it. and that the people who hand you a plate without asking questions are the whole reason a man keeps his porch light burning. But here's what I did with that spring. I got my chair out of the garage, and Jean helped me carry it back to the window, to its exact spot, and we had a beer sitting on the tailgate afterward and didn't say much, which is how men my age say the important things. I found a nursery 2 counties over that stock's Abraham Darby roses, and I put the south beds back, slower than I'd have liked. My knees writing checks my pride kept cashing. I talked to Ellen while I worked them. I told her how it all went. I like to think she'd have hated the fuss and loved the ending. And I had one wall of the kitchen repainted, just one, the pantry door frame. The painter, nice young fellow, thought I was crazy because I had him strip it instead, all the way down past the greige, past the primer to the old cream paint underneath. The marks are still there, faint but there. Daniel, age 4. Daniel, age 9. Daniel, age 12 and a half, because that year he insisted on the half. Which brings me to the porch light, and then I'll let you go. About 4 months after they left, on a Sunday evening, a car pulled up to the curb and sat there a while. Then Tommy came up the walk, and behind him, slower, with his hands in his pockets like a boy summoned to the principal, came my son. Tommy hugged me around the middle and ran straight for the garage and the wrenches. Daniel stood on the bottom step of the porch, my porch, and he didn't try a speech. He just said, "I've been driving past on Sundays. The light's always on. Megan said, either ring the bell or take a different road." "Smart woman," I said, "occasionally." He laughed and it cracked in the middle, and my son sat down on the porch steps of the house he grew up in, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, he talked to me. Not at me, not about me, not around me. To me. About the lie he'd let stand for 2 years because unwinding it kept costing more than letting it ride. Until one Tuesday he wrote a letter to his own father with a 30-day deadline in it and told himself it was love. He didn't ask to move back. I want to be clear about that, and I wouldn't have said yes. Some things, once you plane them down, are never the same thickness again, and pretending otherwise ruins the whole joint. But he comes on Sundays now. Him and Tommy most weeks. Tommy's marks are on the pantry door frame in pencil under his father's. We measured him last month. He's growing like a weed in the south beds. So that's the story. If you take one thing from an old machinist, take this. Love your family with everything you've got, help them, house them, feed them, forgive them. But keep your name on your deed and your key in your drawer, not because you expect the worst, but because a man with a deed gets spoken to. And every soul in your house, including you, behaves a little better when the speaking to stays possible. It's evening here now. Tommy's inside beating his father at cards. The roses need deadheading tomorrow, and the third stair still creaks because some things you fix and some things you keep. And the porch light's on. It always is. If this story found you somewhere quiet tonight, stay a while. There's a new one on this porch every week, and the light's on for you too. This has been the Porch Light. This story, like all stories told here, is an original work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental. Good night, friend. Drive safe going home.